Lili?
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, very dear friends of WISC, and welcome to our second Zoom meeting. This meeting will be moderated by Dr. Batya Brutin and will actually open a set of two Zooms devoted to women's voice in Auschwitz. Today's meeting, we are going to focus on individual women and their voices, whereas the next Zoom will be devoted to women that acted as a part of a group or an organization. My logic was to move from the micro to the macro, from the individual to the particular, and to a general movement or movements that women acted in. I wish us all a very, very challenging and interesting evening. And again, I dearly thank everyone that joined us today. And I wish us, of course, a very challenging and interesting evening. Dr. Brutin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening from Israel, and welcome to the first panel in the series about women in Auschwitz. I would like to begin with a prayer in memory of those who lost their lives in the October War, prayer for a quick recovery for the wounded, and above all, a prayer for the immediate return of those abducted by Hamas in Gaza. In the panel Women Voices from Auschwitz, we will listen to three speakers who will present to us stories about three special women who were in Auschwitz. I'd like to mention that questions to the speakers can be sent either in the chat or in the discussion that will take place after the three lectures. Now I'm very delighted to invite the first lecturer, Professor Lili Halpert Zamir, who is the co-founder of the academic of WISC, and she is also the academic director of WISC. And Professor Zamir is a researcher of Holocaust and Gender Studies. She is a member of the Academic Council as well as the head of its Center for Women's and Gender Studies at the David Yellin Academic College of Education in Jerusalem. Professor Zamir serves as the presidential advisor of gender equality, as well as the sexual harassment treatment and prevention commissioner of the college. She has published several books, 7 of which deal with the Holocaust, as well as dozens of articles in Hebrew and English that focus on Holocaust and gender studies, and one monography of Danilo Kish in Serbo-Creation. Professor Zamir will talk tonight about Lili Kasticher, the woman who wrote in Auschwitz. And let me share the, find it now, but in a minute I'll find it. Lili, the floor is yours, and I'll look for
Thank you. Thank you very much, Batya. In my presentation tonight, I would like to focus on a unique historical phenomenon called Lili Kasticher, her deeds and works as a young woman in Auschwitz-Birkenau, from April to November 1944. I'd like to approach her story as a phenomenon since her literary works were already very widely discussed in many of my articles, and also a book that I wrote and was published in 2022 by Moreshet and will be translated to English soon for our English readers. But her story I think can serve us as a case study that enlightens us the need of ongoing studies and research on the unique fate of women in the Holocaust, focusing on her story in the very huge and well-researched subject of his story dealing with the Holocaust. And in our case, of course, it's Auschwitz. My story begins in 2010 when I was teaching in David Yellin College a course named The Unique Fate of Women in the Holocaust. This is a course given in the history department every other year, and that's why it's very crowded, very demanded, extremely emotionally and intellectually challenging one. At the end of one of my lecture, a young student approached me with a very shy smile, and she said quite quietly, "You know, I have a sister called Lili, and she's named after my grandmother, Lili. She was in Auschwitz, and she survived Auschwitz." Such an opening would usually be like music to my ear. But it was 7 o'clock in the evening. I was teaching from the morning. I was exhausted. All I wanted to do is just to run away and go home. So I said, "Okay, great." "No, you don't understand," the student insists. "You don't understand. My grandmother wrote in Auschwitz, and my mother can show you her writings." "Great," I replied, while I was measuring the distance from my desk to the door. At the same evening, Miss Daniela Sela, the student's mother, called me. I was already, after a good bath, with a good cup of coffee, and I was amazed to hear from Daniela that her mother, Lili Kasticher, who was originally from Yugoslavia, which is connected with my doctoral thesis many, many years before, not only that she was in Auschwitz-Birkenau, she survived, but she also wrote some prose and poetry, and she managed to smuggle everything out from the Inferno and brought everything to Israel. But as far as I know, I said to Daniela on the phone, no private woman, no private person could write in Auschwitz. "But my mother did," answered Daniela, "and I can show you." At that moment, I said, "Shall we meet tonight?" "No," she was laughing. "Let's meet tomorrow morning." That phone call, I must admit, changed my life as a researcher. Almost everything that I have known before that evening about Auschwitz changed. It changed because, as most of us that are dealing with Auschwitz-Birkenau, I knew that we have writings from there, but we can divide it into 4 principal groups. Number 1, the forced postcards that the victims, the inmates, were forced to write to their relatives, telling them that they are in a good place, the conditions are fair, and the food is sufficient, and the work is reasonable. But those postcards were written only by those who knew German and knew how to write in German. The second group, which is very well known, is the group of the Sonderkommando that not only documented the happenings in Birkenau, but also took pictures of the killing and the gas chambers. The third group were the political prisoners that could somehow get papers and writing implements. And the last group, group number 4, were the Czech prisoners from the Czech family camp in Birkenau. But a private woman writing in Auschwitz, I did not hear about it before. And yes, many people said that they wrote in Auschwitz. Many letters I got when I started my journey telling about private persons who apparently wrote in Auschwitz. One of the most famous examples is, of course, Ruth Kluger, that we were sure that she wrote in Auschwitz until in 1994, she gave an interview and she said, no, I wrote in Gross-Rosen camp, but yes, I wrote what I remembered that I was reciting and telling in Auschwitz. I wrote about my Auschwitz memories, but she couldn't, as no one else, she couldn't, and she didn't write in Auschwitz. Now let's go a little bit back to Lili Kasticher and her story. Lili was born in 1923 in Petroslavo, Yugoslavia, and subsequently, for her good luck, lived in Novi Sad, which meant that she did not, she was at Novi Sad until 44 and not like most of Yugoslavian Jews that already in 42 were evacuated. She was deported to Auschwitz in April 1944 and got the cassette number 8965. It was tattooed on her arm. From there, she was assigned to Gross-Rosen camp Oberhohenalbe labor camp, where she worked for the Lawrence factory until liberation in May 1945. Despite the common belief that female inmates in Auschwitz did not write because of the severe punishments against those who were caught with a stub of pencil and a piece of paper, Lili somehow managed to write. Not only she wrote, but she also tried to encourage her inmate friends to write, or at least to participate in her reading evenings that she used to do in Birkenau. She knew, of course, that if she had been caught, she would be killed. And still she dared and she did it. In Auschwitz, from Auschwitz, she left us a small collection of poems written in Auschwitz, and also a political social manifesto called Rules of Behavior, which she developed later on her next camp. She wrote on small pieces of paper with her very small handwriting. Batya, can we see one example of her writings there? Most of the poems, if you see on the left side, there was a tiny drawing. And in some of the poems, like this one, we had on the right side the date. Out of her 9 poems, we have 5 with specific dates and 2 only with the year and place. All those little pieces of paper, on one side was the poetry, on the other side it was a piece of paper from the office, mainly with re-questions forms. Now the question is, of course, how did Lili got paper and writing implements in Birkenau? In an interview published in an Hungarian language Israeli newspaper, Wikalet, which is the New East, on February 1951, Lili explained how she stayed alive, and she also relieved the ways. There is some noise in the background. Please close your mics. Please, please. And she also explained how did she get writing implements in Birkenau. And the story goes like that. When she was young, somebody gave her a book. She had a book about palm reading. And while being in Birkenau, she decided to cheer up her friends by reading from their palms. And of course, she read very optimistic and good news from their palms. Once the couple approached her and said, "Can you please read my palm?" And she did. And of course, there were very good news that she told the couple. Slowly, they became friendly enough, and the couple invited her to read and write to her boyfriend who was in the front, and also illustrate the letters that she sent into the front, because she saw how gifted Lili was and how good were her hands in drawings. That's how Lili managed to be in the office, and that's how she got those little pieces of paper, and when she could, she stole them and she put them in her pocket, and also some crayons. If we are looking at her writings in general, we can divide them in three categories. The first one is her writings in Auschwitz-Birkenau. We have about 9 poems that I dealt with. There must be more, but some of them I couldn't trace, and those that I could trace, I was not able to read because the paper was not good enough preserved. What's very interesting that in Auschwitz, also 2 friends of her, Piri and Yutzi Abraham, wrote 2 pieces of poetry, and it was with the prize that she offered some of her bread. Also, she wrote the code of behavior, which is very interesting because it's really a political and social manifesto, which starts here. There is no I, only we as a group, we can survive. The second category is a bunch of poems and drawings, a quite large number already, from Gross-Rosen-Oberhochenalbe camp, where she was until liberation in 1945. What is very interesting here to see that on the second camp, when writing and drawing was not that dangerous, Lili encouraged her friends to do the artwork. She was the one who gave them the writing implements, crayons, pieces of paper, etc. But she herself created less. She was the organizer of the group. Whereas in Auschwitz, where it was very dangerous to write, she did the main writing, which shows also a kind of leadership. She wouldn't risk their lives. She was ready to risk hers, but not theirs. And the third category of Lili's writings is the diary that she wrote already in Israel, with her memories in Auschwitz. And also she was referring to some of the poems that she wrote there and connecting them to the facts as she remembered them. In my book, I also pointed out that not only those 9 poems plus the 2 poems of her friends and the manifesto were smuggled out of Auschwitz, but also a very interesting letter in Yiddish that Alex, her son, brought me in 1916. And it was very interesting to see. It's not her writing. It was translated, and you can see the full text in my book. It was translated for me into Hebrew, but it's very interesting, and it's a future research to see why has she chosen to save that particular letter? Who wrote it? Who gave it to her? And what were the reasons that she chose to save that letter and bring it with her? I'm running out of time. Am I not,
Almost,
Batya?
almost.
Okay. So I would like to conclude with my argument. Listen, not only that Lili wrote in Auschwitz-Birkenau, not only that she organized her friends to listen to her writings, not only she wrote a political manifesto, but also she had the courage to face all these difficulties as not belonging to any organization. She had no backing. She was not a part of anything. She was one of the many prisoners there. And I think that by writing, she has done the opposite from what was expected from the victims by the Germans. She proved by her creativity that the group in general and she in particular are far away from being the Untermensch. And I would like to share with you one of the things that Primo Levi has recited in his book, The Drowned and the Saved. He's reciting there a speech of one of the SS men who is speaking to the prisoners, and he's saying to them, listen, nothing will remain from you. Nothing will come out from Auschwitz. No evidence. It doesn't matter how the war is going to be ended, but everything will be cleaned, destroyed. You people will not survive. None of you. And if one of you survives, who will believe to your stories? Well, Primo Levi survived, Lili Kasticher survived, and they told their stories. According to Nietzsche, we can see Lili as a metaphysical revenger. But unfortunately, when Lili came to Israel, nobody was listening to her. Nobody was free to listen to any of the victim and survivors' voices, especially if they were women. Women who did not belong to any organization, partisans, ghetto rebellions, and so forth and so forth. I think had she been a man, her story and her bravery and her personality as a metaphysical revenger would be a part of most of the history books that we have in our schooling systems. But unfortunately, Lili was a woman and she was from Yugoslavia, which is also a Jewry that was not discussed and researched enough. So her voice was quite unheard. Somehow she always reminds me of the story that Virginia Woolf wrote. Had William Shakespeare, if William Shakespeare had a sister, well, Lili Kasticher is the sister. Nobody was really free and open-minded to listen to her. I hope that by giving this lecture and in my articles and the book, which will be in English very soon, I'm trying to start to begin a very modest way of rehabilitation for Lili Kasticher and the female voice, which was not heard, not at the right time and not at the right place. It was too late and too far from what she needed while she was alive. Lili Kasticher died in October 1973. And her story and her voice must be heard. Thank you, everyone, for sharing with me.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lili, for revealing a special and unknown story in an interesting way. Thank you. The second